and welcome to another episode of Doubl3Tap. Today we are joined by Ben, founder and CEO at Cambria. Cambria is building like a RuneScape inspired Web3 game for degens with some interesting on-chain mechanics. Ben, how you doing, man?
Good, good. Happy to be here.
Yeah, man. Excited. Well, before we get into it, disclosures out of the way. So, this content is for entertainment and informational purposes only, should not be viewed as financial advice. The opinions shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may have investments in some of the digital assets or companies mentioned throughout the show. With that out of the way, Ben, what games are you currently playing?
What games am I playing? Good question. I th- I guess okay. So here, recent games wise, like I feel like this is almost like the curse of the game dev. Like you can never play any game without like hyper analyzing it. Pausing the game to like jot down notes. Yeah, I guess a lot of the recent games, mostly just looking for inspiration. I think Diablo 2, played Darkest Dungeon recently. Don't know if you heard of Darkest Dungeon. It's kind of like this dark fantasy, gothic horror, dungeon crawler. Some very interesting mechanics, like a lot of RNG actually. RNG is a very big part of the game. But yeah, that's been a ton of fun, and we're also with the kind of this upcoming game mode that we're working on, Gold Rush. Like there's a lot of so the darkness mechanics, stress mechanics as a resource when you go outside the castle. So yeah, a lot of similar vibes, I guess.
What other like parts of Darkest Dungeon were you, or not Darkest Dungeon? Sorry, Dark and Darker. Were you pulling inspiration from?
Yeah, so actually from both, Dark and Darker is yeah, I guess the extraction based gameplay, the PvP elements, but also the balance of like mining gold versus PvP. Like if you just want to mine gold, extract with that, that's a valid form of gameplay. Yeah, so I think like at least with Gold Rush, at least with the dungeons, I think the extraction loop is makes a lot of sense, especially in the because it kind of appeals to the degen gamblers, right? You gear up, right? You go in with like some loot that's worth or some gear that's worth real money. You kind of and there's a lot of risk, like sometimes out of your control, like the dungeon just like turns extremely hard, based on the luck of the draw. I think there's a lot of sort of those RNG elements with Darkest Dungeon. It's actually very interesting because it's almost like party based. So you have a party of four that can have like its own quirks, and then so as you dive deeper in the dungeon, like basically the conceit is like your characters start taking stress damage, and then sometimes they kind of yeah, when hitting like certain stress levels, they'll either it's basically a roll, right? So 25% of the time they'll kind of be yeah, like resolve, hit like a resolve check where they're going to be buffed, like they deal with stress better. But most of the time, right, you start getting debuffs, and you start getting these status effects that are quite annoying to deal with. But I think with Dark Ascension, like once things go bad, it gets bad very quickly. Like a lot of the bad outcomes kind of stack on each other. So it's very kind of like feast or famine sort of gameplay, which is yeah, very exciting. Especially if you put like 10 hours into a character and things start going bad. Because like the game is also like, there's no like save points or saves coming. So once things go bad, like you can lose your character that you basically spend a ton of time on. So very fun stuff.
High risk, high reward,
Exactly.
which I think segues us nicely into talking about Cambria. I think it would be really helpful for any listeners who haven't given the game a go if you could like give a sort of TLDR on the core gameplay loop.
Yeah. So right now, what we have in production is Duel Arena. So essentially, you can challenge other players to a one versus one duel. stake ETH and tokens on the outcome. It's kind of this PvP sort of game mode where there's an element of skill with the stand switching. So yeah, obviously with the stakes, it kind of makes it extremely exciting, depending on how much you're risking here. Some of our whales are risking like thousands of dollars. Obviously you can play with lower stakes as well.
I would love for you to provide a bit more color on some of the key metrics that you're seeing. So, like, how
Yeah.
many average players? What's their like typical wager amount, and like, and how much regular volume or liquidity is locked within the platform?
Yeah, so we actually don't lock any liquidity. So the way the contracts work, we actually never take custody of the crypto itself. So it kind of like goes to the contract. We have a main contract. We have an escrow contract that basically both players create a transaction to deposit the initial stakes in there, and then basically after that, like only one of three things can happen. Like either one person wins, the duel is canceled, or the duel is voided by the server. But basically, the server just emits this kind of like message that this is the person that won, and then that's sort of used by the contract, and then whoever wins kind of creates a transaction to claim that. But yeah, in terms of stats, I think so far it's almost like 1,700 ETH. On Blast mainnet. We also launched on Base. I think we got up to like 5K ETH on Base. Obviously, on Blast, there's a lot of like kind of native incentives. So that's been driver of a lot of growth recently. But yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that I guess like DAU wise, there's actually not that many players. It's a very kind of niche game, right? Because really, like, how many people are down to like, risk a ton of crypto, right, on duels? Not many, not many. But yeah, even so, like, I think the numbers have been quite crazy. Yeah, I think it's 60 mil kind of in ETH, and then revenue wise, so we basically take a 4% fee. 1% of that goes to fee share incentives for invite codes. 1.5 kind of goes to Excalibur, which is basically like this pool that builds up. So the 1.5 goes towards that pool, and then based on the stake, right, you have a chance to win Excalibur. You get chosen. Big sword drops from the sky, right, and you gain the Excalibur item, which gives you the basically a essence points boost. As well as we have a V2 contract that utilizes some blast native features, so it would stream like real time gas fee share like sequencer revenue to your wallet directly, as well as like give you real time yield on the main Cambria contract.
And do you have any idea as to like what spurred this emergent behavior? Like, are people just incentivized by the points and like speculating on the value of a potential like token launch in the future, or are they really just loving the sort of nostalgic RuneScape vibes and get a kick out of these high stakes wagers?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. And that I think is the trickiest part of, I guess, crypto gaming, at least recently, has been like, the more basically incentives that you throw at things, the more that people will squeeze out like every last bit of the fun that they can out of the game, where essentially, the game becomes farming, right? Currently we're incentivizing based on volume. Like I guess usually, the ideal would be kind of incentivizing matchmaking liquidity, or incentivizing like risk, actually made. But both of those things are hard to do, and it's easy to game as well. Like you definitely, it's a niche type of gameplay, but you definitely get the obsessed players there. So you also get the basically emergent behavior of, you have the sharks like that are always online, right? They're always looking for the noobs to kind of like, lure into these more high skill game modes. Or, we had to do a lot of like, prevention of people just like, switching the dual mode, like, very quickly to throw people off. there's a lot of like scamming along those lines. Like, if you're risking ETH, you never played Dagger before. We definitely got some of that. So whales, I think in general, like they just want to play something interesting, right? So it's very, number one, to get their attention, it's hard, and to keep their attention is even harder, right? So yeah, whales, you kind of rapidly get bored if they're not fully immersed. So right now, like, it's actually, yeah, retention wise, like Dual Arena is kind of very leaky right now. Obviously, we're working on this, fuller game mode with Gold Rush that has the scaling elements, the PVM elements. But yeah, it's actually quite tricky, right? Obviously, we don't want to be on this content studio grind where, like, we're always spending resources to create quests or whatever it is. Like, obviously, the PvP sort of multiplayer element is a big part of it. But yeah, that's been, I guess, a challenge.
So now that you've launched on both Blast and Base, I'd love to hear what are some of the main takeaways from each ecosystem and how that impacts a game like yours that's so reliant on high in-game trading volume and attracting these degen crypto whales.
Yeah, I think a lot of the player behavior wise, as well as the audience, like, it's mostly similar. I think a lot of the people that have ETH on Blast also have ETH on Base, or they did a couple months back. So it's like, yeah, like, where do people have their ETH? I think right now decent liquidity is definitely on Blast, for multiple reasons, like obviously incentives, yield, consumer apps, games like crypto valleys. Yeah, multiple reasons. But yeah, I think right now, like, obviously Blast, a lot of it's driven by the Blast Gold incentives. The people saw the success at Blur. They're also betting on the same thing with Blast. So you almost get this, like, there's obviously a lot of Gamblify as well. Like, it's almost like plus EV gambling, where you're getting paid to engage with all these D apps, where maybe you might lose some money, but you're getting Blast Gold as a result. I don't think you saw that on Base. I think obviously incentive wise, like Pac-Man is kind of the genius there. But yeah, I think, like, even like long term wise, like, I do think Blast is the best bet, I guess, for where degen liquidity is going to be, because there's always going to be the next incentive, right? If you followed Pac-Man and seen some of the incentive design, I think you can definitely expect that. But yeah, it becomes trickier because with such heavy incentives, like I said before, right? People just squeeze all the fun of it.
Another thing we wanted to kind of pick your brain on was, clearly you're going after this RuneScape-like aesthetic. And I don't remember specifically if you've kind of marketed it as that, but we're curious what exactly the intent was originally beyond kind of adopting that aesthetic. Was it, hey, we're going to kind of leverage an IP that gamers know to de-risk distribution in a way? Was it, hey, you're a RuneScape diehard, you were familiar with this mode, and that mode was kind of an inspiration for Dual Arena? Just kind of, we'll kick it off there, and then I've got some follow-on stuff.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the two things you just mentioned. Like, originally when we started the game, it was like almost like building the game that I wanted to play. It was like dream crypto game for me. And you get like YC advice, being obsessed with your user. Like, I think it's easiest to build a game if you're the target user. I think the well audience that some of them have the same motivations. Stuff that I experienced kind of like trading NFTs. And yeah, like the funny thing is, like, before all of this, like, was kind of at the place where, like, I wasn't even playing any games at all. Like, it was kind of like boring, right? Like, was a huge gamer, like, as a kid as well as like in college, but with real life, kind of like got hit with stuff. And I feel like there's a lot of, like, target, like, audience wise, there's a lot of like similar players, right? Mostly 25 to 40-year-old men, kind of like obsessed with RuneScape, WoW as a kid, right? Maybe not a lot of time currently, but they kind of want to recreate the thrill. Crypto is kind of that outlet for them. But yeah, like, going back to like whale, like, behavioral patterns. Yeah, we talked about, like, the flexing obviously is a huge driver. But yeah, I think, like, competition, like economic PvP, getting the best gear, getting the blue party hat to flex, I think that's a huge part. So a big thing that worked out, like, volume wise for us, was like having the rolling 24-hour leaderboard as well as the leaderboard in general, right? It seems so simple, but like, have like, especially like whales, right? Like competing with each other to be number one, like, you just have that's, a huge driver. Obviously the social side as well. Like I think like very early on base, like pretty much everybody who was, early to the newest and coolest things, like they were in the arena.
So you've mentioned we've talked a lot about specifically targeting whales and building experiences for those whales. We've also talked about how difficult it is to not only garner their attention but continue to engage, maintain that attention, and kind of tease that attention out. I'm curious with the other game modes, is the idea to kind of continue to garner the attention of whales, or is the idea that the other game modes bring, let's call them fish, into the ecosystem, which then can be served up to the whales in the arena game mode? Curious how you're thinking about kind of building out the full scope.
That's actually exactly like, the kind of the meat of what we're tackling now. So yeah, you definitely need the different audiences. Like, yeah, there's no way to scale accessibility wise, like, audience wise. So yeah, like, your common advice of like, figuring out like who are the audiences, like, the more audiences I think you add though, the trickier, right? To have gameplay that appeals to both, where it's not like you kind of like mash together like a whale game and like a free to play game and like it's like this weird like Frankenstein, right? So part of what we're trying to do is like, just have so right now, like, you have the skill bit, like the skilling economy where, it's a lot more like grinders that, free to earn, you kind of like are mining. You like, I think like some of the emergent mechanics that you saw in RuneScape, like we're also trying to replicate. So, RuneScape, you had the like high level rune crafters, let's say like doing law rune running, which was basically, you set rune crafters would sit at the altar. They got the XP because like, players, if you didn't have any gold, right, you just like bought some rune essence, you took it from the bank, and then you're doing the running back and forth, right? Because like the inventory is limited. So you traded it over, you got the law runes back after they imbued the runes. They got the XP, you got the law runes that you could sell, right? So for the runners, it was easy sort of money making. But the higher level players, they were grinding for the XP, right? They wanted to be that top of rune crafting, which at the time was extremely like kind of hardcore, and it was very hard to get at level 99. So yeah, I think like some of those like sort of emergent sort of gameplay behaviors, like I think we're trying to go towards like almost like a scholar model where we have these charters, which basically you need a charter to mint your character, and then the whale will basically mint a bunch of these and delegate the charter to other players that they think are promising, and then there's always the option to revoke the charter. But basically there's almost like an XP share going on where the whale is like competing for the rolling 24-hour XP leaderboard or resource leaderboard, or they're competing with other whales, like from a market sort of standpoint, market manipulation, like some of the economic PvP. But yeah, I think like combining those I think is definitely tricky, but I think with the real money stakes, it's actually not that hard to do. I think it's just like getting the core economic loops correct.
And you've clearly mapped the Web3 or on-chain whales to kind of the PvP risk-based game mode of Duel Arena. I'm curious, you just brought up like runners, right? Different archetypes of people that played RuneScape. So when you're thinking about designing these new game modes, are you thinking like, okay, here are the different archetypes of people that participated in the RuneScape economy, and then here's how we can map that to something, like you said, on a smaller scale at Cambria?
Yeah.
Or is it, hey, here are the archetypes of Web3 players. We've already kind of looked at the whales. Now here are the other archetypes, and we're going to try to kind of map that back to what you remember from your experience playing RuneScape. I'm curious how you think about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because that goes into the like, RuneScape audience wise versus the current Web3 audience. Like it's really not that much different. Like, let's say like the whales, like the grinders, the maybe free to play, free to earn type players, and then you have the speculators, right? But like you have this also in RuneScape. Like the speculators were the traders, right? They call them the merchers, right? So they would be doing massive trades. Like they didn't play the game at all, right? They were like on a level 3 account or whatever. They were just they had millions of RSGP, and then they're kind of like buy low, sell high, right? Kind of taking advantage of, as well as like gain content updates, right? It was kind of this little game on top. Like it's just like the trading kind of mini game that people are playing in crypto now. So yeah, I mean, really, if you look at it, like it's kind of just repeating the same story like over and over again, right? Crypto is just this big MMO now that people are playing. I guess like one of the differences would be like I guess with crypto, like the capital coordination, like capital formation as well as like the coordination is easier. It's easier to get a ton of money into something and kind of like very fast, right? So obviously with RuneScape, sort of economy, that was hard to do.
And that just about wraps it up. It's been a good chat, Ben. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Sorry to disrupt your morning. Yeah, it's not typical hours for a crypto degen.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, man, it's been cool chatting. Thanks for this.
Anytime.
The content of this video is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. The views shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may hold investments in some of the companies or digital assets featured in the video.